I really got a kick out of the very first item on the instructions. It says, every mushroom enthusiast should have rubbing alcohol along with gloves and paper towels, and I agree. I cannot tell you how beneficial paper towels are to growing mushrooms at home. Everything needs to be sterile and clean. And we actually have never even invested in the fancy ventilation systems. We have always used this one still air box, an SAB, and we have a video on how to create this. So everything we do is inside this SAB still air box for the most part. And we'll go over that step by step in this video. So I recommend 91% alcohol. And what I've done here is put it in a spray bottle. And I'm constantly spraying everything with alcohol, 91% alcohol. Many of you have brought up the question about 70% versus the 91%. And if you feel like 70% is better, then use 70%. If you feel like the 91% is better, like we do, you can always add water if you need to. You can always mix the 91 with the 70%. So I thought I would just jump on that before anybody responds in the comments. But that has come forward with some of you. So I just want to bring that up. But we do use 91% alcohol. And the spray bottle makes it really easy. And then I also recommend a mister bottle for the fruiting process for your water. So this is alcohol for the sterilization process. I use it in every single step. I go through so much alcohol. So I agree with this number one in the instructions. Get yourself really good alcohol, get a spray bottle for it so you can fill it up, and paper towels. So I know this might seem like going overboard with the paper towels, but what I'd like to do is buy them that are individually wrapped or that come in a big pack. We mainly shop at Costco and buy in bulk, and so when it's in a big pack, they can still be individually wrapped. I like it when the paper towels are individually wrapped because I can keep them more sterile that way. These are not sitting on the kitchen counter. These are what we use for mycology. So in between, I put it back in a bag to keep them somewhat clean and not sitting out. And everybody's grubby hands on them. So I designate a roll for the mycology projects. And then I get it out when I'm ready. So alcohol, spray bottle, paper towels. I know it sounds silly, but you're going to need a lot of that. Sterilization, keeping things clean is important. And gloves, we do use gloves. We do use gloves inside the still air box as well. So absolutely on that. Also, when you're using the gloves, it's really handy because you're going to constantly be spraying your gloves, your hands with alcohol. You don't want your hands being sprayed with alcohol. It's going to dry them out. So it's also really good for your hands to have the gloves on, because they're going to be covered in alcohol. So I recommend when you put your gloves on and as you're going in and out of your still air box, spray it, spray it, spray it. And we're going to cover sterilization as we go, because it's really, again, so important when growing mushrooms, especially from home. When you first get started growing mushrooms, you have a choice. You can start with spores or you can start with mycelium. And we use mycelium. I created a video for you about your choice between spores and mycelium. I apologize for the rocky video here. Let me put the camera down. You guys asked for real-time videos, so I'm giving it to you in real time. It's just you and me and the camera here. So I created a video for you talking about spores versus mycelium. And if you need to go into detail about that, just hit up that video that I created for you, because I really dive deep into this thought behind growing your spores, germinating your spores into mycelium, and just working with mycelium and not spores. When you get started, whether you're working with spores or mycelium, you're going to need grain to colonize. So if it's just spores that you're working with, then there is a process of germination where your spores germinate into this mycelium. And that is a lengthy process. Spores, it takes a while. When we used this grow kit, we used spores. We used spores. And it came with this grain bag. And let me just say, it took what seemed like forever. So what we did was we had spores in a syringe of all the mushrooms we wanted to grow. And we had all these bags. And there was a port in the kits to inoculate the grain with the spores. And again, it took a really long time. And a lot of times your grain will dry out. And then you move to, after it colonizes and it's all white in your bag or your jar, then you move it to substrate or your soil to colonize again. So think about that. When you're starting out, if you're using spores, whether it's going to a bag like this in a kit, or it's going to a grain jar or WBS, when it's spores, you're going to have to allow for the spores to become mycelium. Then the mycelium will colonize like this. After it colonizes, whether it's in a jar of bird seed or grain, this is called a WBS jar, wild bird seed, or a bag, it doesn't matter, it's the same. It's colonizing. When it's all white, and what you really want is this rhizomorphic growth. Tomatose is fluffy. Rhizomorphic is more antler and branch-like. A lot of people will get confused on tomatose and think that it's mold. The rhizomorphic, you can see it's more branch-like and antler. So once it's colonized and it's completely thick white, whether again it's in a jar, a bag, bird seed or grain, doesn't matter, whatever you choose, it's your choice. When it's fully colonized, then you're going to move it to substrate. Substrate is soil. So what we do is we create a 50-50 blend for the majority of our mushrooms, meaning 50% cocoa brick or a block and 50% vermiculite. And then a lot of times we'll use a vermiculite casing layer. And I wanted to show you the pillowcase. I know this sounds crazy, but pillowcase is really needed along with a pot or crock pots for creating your substrate or your soil. And so what we do is we create a pot of substrate, 50 cocoa, 50 vermiculite, and then we put that on the stove, and you bring it to pasteurization, which is 140 degrees, and you don't want to cook it, so you're going to add water to your pot, and I have a video on how to create substrate. It's very easy. But our number one tip is to use a pillowcase to strain out the water. So after you've created your substrate on the stovetop or a crock pot, you're going to pour it into a pillowcase, and we use a 5-gallon bucket and a pillowcase. And we just dump the substrate that has all this extra water from the pot, dump it into the pillowcase, and then we strain it out and squeeze it, strain it. We have a video on this, but the pillowcase definitely makes substrate easier. It really does. I mean, that is like a number one tip. I would grab a pillowcase. And so we use these pillowcases just for mycology. We have 2 mycology pillowcases that stay sanitary and clean. And your substrate is going to be pasteurized before you pour it into the pillowcase. Once you've strained it through your pillowcase, then you just add it to whatever you're going to use to fruit. So if you're using jars, you're going to break up your jars, and what we do is just simply open the tops, and I put in a sterile knife, a clean knife, and I kind of break it up and go around the sides and dump it, and it's called birthing. You're going to birth your colonized jars when they're completely full white. This one is not finished, as you can see. When it's super white and dense with mycelium colonized, then you're going to put it to your substrate. And then that's going to colonize and turn white, you'll see. Then you have fruiting conditions. So let's talk about what you're going to put your grain in once it's colonized. You can grow in bags, in tubs, in buckets, in so many different things. Lion's mane, many times we grow them in jars. So it doesn't matter what you're going to grow your mushrooms in this conversation, because the idea is the step by step. So once it's colonized in your jar, bag, whatever, grain, bird seed, then you're going to put it to your substrate. We use tubs. We grow all of our mushrooms in tubs that have tops, and they have air exchange in them. And that's a totally different topic, because you have choices on how you want to fruit your mushrooms. A lot of people will fruit their oyster mushrooms in bags right on the countertop. We use, again, tubs for all of them that have tops with air exchange.